I was invited to attend a centennial event for a luxury brand. The moment I stepped in, the high society ladies couldn't resist whispering behind their hands. Didn't she just go bankrupt? Yeah. Rachel was even selling her Hermes bags last month. If it were me, I'd be too embarrassed to show up. The same women who used to fawn over me now sneered and turned their heads in disdain. I ignored them entirely, heading straight for the high jewelry display. Today, the brand was showcasing a rare piece, the prized rose tiara from an ancient Italian noble family. Each rose detachable as a brooch, the sapphires studding the petals were breathtaking, but still elegant. I was transfixed, an intense desire to make it mind-building with every second. So absorbed was I that I nearly missed Chris's call. When I picked up, my eyes were still on the tiara, my mind elsewhere. What are you doing? The rose tiara is beautiful. Rachel, where are you right now? Heaven, I murmured, stepping closer, examining each petal with wide eyes. There was a pause on the other end. When Chris's voice came back, it had an amused tone. The rose tiara is about to be yours, darling. What did you say, Mr. Dean? I gasped, eyes wide. But you have to be good and do as I say. I'll be good, I promise, I said, nodding eagerly. Wear what I sent you tonight. All right. And don't forget those 3 times you owe me. I'll make it up, I swear. When? I looked at the tiara behind the glass, biting my lip. Tonight. Perfect. His laugh echoed over the line. I'll pick you up in an hour. Chris's Bentley was parked outside. His assistant came in personally to escort me, the rose tiara now on my head. The same ladies who'd shunned me were left in shock. One even tried to approach me, fishing for a little connection. I gave a derisive snort, turned and walked off, letting her stand there awkwardly. In the end, Chris was the ultimate playboy, swapping girlfriends every 3 days. Who knows how long it'll be before he's had enough of me. For now, I might as well enjoy the ride and make the most of it. I hopped into the car, throwing myself right into Chris's arms. As a kid, I used to sweet-talk my dad into spoiling me with jewelry and bags. Now I could work the same charm on Chris. No problem. The divider rose in the back seat of the Bentley. Chris's slender fingers brushed my calf, touching the sheer material of my stockings. The tired look in his eyes disappeared, replaced by a gleam of desire. Rachel, you came out dressed like this? He held my calf, gently kneading it. I was wearing a black velvet slip dress, stockings and heels. An outfit that could seem daring if not done right, but raised in wealth. I could carry it with ease. Looking up at him, I asked, don't you like it? Beautiful, but only for home. And only for my eyes. So you can tear it off yourself, huh? In a playful mood. I didn't mind his particular taste today, and even teased him a bit. Naturally, I got what was coming. Chris tore my stockings right there in the car. It was a while before we stopped, and he carried me out. Hair a mess and dress torn. I hid my face in his black suit jacket, too embarrassed to look up. Back at his hilltop villa, in the master bedroom on the 3rd floor, he asked, do you like the tiara? I love it. I clung to it, reluctant to take it off. Then keep it on. Chris squeezed my cheek, his eyes full of playful mischief. And only it. Seeing my wide-eyed shock, Chris's smile deepened. I couldn't help covering my eyes and letting out a squeal. He might be almost 30 with plenty of experience, but he was still a beast. Rachel, he whispered, leaning down to kiss my flushed ear. If you don't behave, I just might take back my money. No, don't. If I couldn't wear designer dresses, carry the latest bags, or flaunt the best jewelry, he might as well kill me, even in my most cash-strapped days. I'd rather skip a meal than skip a new dress. So I complied, wearing nothing but the rose tiara. Tonight, Chris was relentless. When he wanted a 3rd round, I cried out, Chris, you're not young anymore. Can't you take it easy? But he just grabbed my ankle and pulled me back, the tiara nearly tumbling off. My long hair spilled across the dark gray sheets. A mess of curls. I looked like a dessert on display, my skin creamy like cheesecake, with a pop of red like a cherry on top. At last he savored every bit, completely satisfied. In his arms, I was almost out cold, tear stains still on my cheeks. The next day, I didn't wake up until nearly noon. On the bedside table was a black card and a note. Baby, 50 million just hit your account. Excited? Signed, Chris. Ecstatic. I tried to jump out of bed but collapsed back from the soreness. Clutching the card, I kissed it, rubbing my aching waist and chuckling, "Old man still got it." Fresh out of the shower, I heard my phone buzz. Seeing the number made my heart sink. "Miss Rachel, it's me. Any progress?" I clutched the phone, pulling at my wet hair in annoyance. Mr. Dean is always careful. He never misses taking precautions. "Miss Rachel," she reminded me, "our family matriarch has made it clear. You have just 1 year. If you can't conceive within a year, there'll be no hope afterward." Chris was from one of LA's wealthiest families with billions to his name. Years ago, when his first love married someone else abroad, he announced he'd never marry or have kids. He was the only heir to the Dean family. Staying single was fine, but leaving no descendants was out of the question. His flings were infamous, and girlfriends came and went, none lasting. Because I looked about 30% like his first love, I was the one who'd lasted the longest. But no one knew how soon he'd tire of me. "I understand. I'll think of something," I said. "Miss Rachel, we're hoping for good news soon. Chris has plenty of money, and what I lack most right now is exactly that." He easily kept me wrapped around his finger with jewelry and designer clothes, making me act as docile as a kitten in his presence. But he probably never thought even a kitten might someday dare to make her own moves. The torn condoms lay scattered on the floor. Chris slowly rose, casually pulling on his shirt. Curled up in the corner of the bed, hugging my knees, I was trembling with fear. Chris's face was expressionless. He hadn't shown any hint of anger from start to finish. But the calmer he was, the more terrified I became. He picked up his tie and instead of putting it on, leaned over and wrapped it around my wrists. "Mr. Dean." Tears fell from my eyes as I stammered, my voice shaking. But Chris's gaze held only calm, cool indifference. Loop by loop, he bound my wrists with his tie, then gently touched my face. "Haven't I been good to you, sweetheart?" I nodded through my tears. "Mr. Dean, you've been very good to me. And all the money I've given you, hasn't it been enough?" I shook my head. "It's more than enough." Chris gave a slow smile. He brushed back the hair from my face, and even pulled the blanket up to cover me. "Mr. Dean." I didn't know what he was planning, and my tears wouldn't stop. What was I thinking, trying to deceive him like this? Would he just throw me out? I cried even harder. Chris stood looking down at me, his gaze distant and cold. "Tonight. Stay here and think about what you really want. Tomorrow morning I want an answer. Mr. Dean." But he didn't look back, leaving the room without another word. The next morning Chris didn't appear. I asked the maid to help untie the knot around my wrists, and was about to take a bath when I got a call. Chris's first love had returned, recently divorced. She landed in LA at 3 a.m. and Chris went to pick her up himself. I knew then that whatever Chris and I had was truly over. But that's fine. Since I was young, my mother always told me, if I couldn't have all the love in the world, I had to make sure I had all the money I could. Thanks to Chris's lavish generosity, my bank account balance was now pretty impressive, and his family's elders had promised that even if I didn't get pregnant, I'd still receive a $2 million check. Sitting on the sofa, I did the math carefully. If I didn't buy horses and luxury jewelry, this money would easily last me a lifetime. And so, even in defeat as a Johnson, I'd still protect my pride. I wasn't being dumped by Chris. I was leaving him of my own free will. But as I opened the suitcase to start packing, tears suddenly spilled over. They fell onto the clothes and shoes, and I finally couldn't hold back, collapsing onto the bed, sobbing out loud. "Chris, you heartless bastard. All I ever wanted was your money, not you. I will never ever care for you again." When I'd finally cried it all out, I asked the maid to come up and help me carry the luggage down. 6 enormous suitcases were lined up in the living room. The butler asked cautiously, "Miss Rachel, are you and Mr. Dean going on a trip? Or perhaps off to an overseas fashion show?" I shook my head, hiding my tear-reddened eyes behind my sunglasses. "No. Don't ask." "Then are you heading somewhere now? Does Mr. Dean know? Should we arrange a car for you? Just take me to the nearest cab stand." "But with so many suitcases, it'll be difficult to take a cab." "I'll manage." The butler didn't dare ask further, and ordered a car to be prepared, though he also planned to call Chris. But just then, I heard the familiar sound of a car engine outside. Moments later, Chris strode in, sharply dressed, crossing the room in long strides. I glanced at him through my sunglasses. He was wearing a fresh suit, not the one he'd left in last night. Ugh, that smug bastard. He'd probably spent all night in bed with his long-lost first love. No wonder he looked so pleased with himself. The more I thought about it, the angrier I felt. And after the anger, a sense of absurdity. Did I really think I was his official girlfriend? I wasn't any different from the countless women he rotated every 3 days. Just because I'd been around longer didn't make me special. But even so, it hurt. Chris was 7 years older than me. He was in college while I hadn't even graduated elementary school. By the time I'd developed a crush on him, he'd graduated, taken over his family's empire, broken up with his first love, and started dating a new woman every few days. Then, when my family went bankrupt and I was harassed by a few spoiled brats in our social circle, Chris had shown a rare bit of kindness and intervened. Maybe it was the dimples in my smile that reminded him of his first love. Chris pursued me, making me his girlfriend, and it lasted until today. As soon as Chris walked in and saw the suitcases in the living room, he turned to me, just about to speak. But I got in first, Mr. Dean, perfect timing. There's something I need to say to you. Chris settled into the sofa across from me, adjusting his tie. Go ahead. I kept my sunglasses on, staring straight at him. Mr. Dean, thank you for all your kindness these past few months. Chris raised a brow, but didn't stop me from continuing. I took a shaky breath, fighting the ache inside me. The only saving grace was my sunglasses. Chris couldn't see how swollen my eyes were from crying. Let's break up. I'm moving out today. Chris didn't respond, just leaned back on the sofa, looking somewhat relaxed. His eyes rested on my face. Rachel, is this what you spent all night thinking about? Yes. I avoided his eyes, not wanting to see any emotion there. I didn't want to see him looking at me with love for someone else. Better to leave now, before I got hurt beyond repair. He pressed his fingertips to his forehead, and when he spoke again, his voice was hoarse and tired. Are you certain? I'm certain. Breaking up with me. Do you think you'll still be able to buy all the Hermes and jewelry you want? Fashion week in Milan and Paris, front row seats, exclusive designer gowns, you'll lose all of it. Next month, I was going to throw you a yacht party and fireworks display in Victoria Harbor for your birthday. Each of his words made my heart waver. Chris knew exactly where to strike. Every word was a temptation, drawing me back into this life of luxury and indulgence. I knew he was lavish. If I stayed, I'd be set for life. But I wanted more. No. I dropped my gaze, squeezing my hands tightly. I don't want any of it, Mr. Dean. I want to end things. Chris said nothing more, but took a step toward me. When I reflexively stepped back, he paused. Rachel. I made a small sound, but still wouldn't look up. I didn't want to hear anything else. Didn't want to stay entangled. I knew myself too well. Facing him would only unravel my resolve completely. If we're ending things, let's settle accounts. His voice was ice cold, and I looked up in shock. Chris had never been the calculating type. He'd always been generous with past girlfriends, never keeping tabs, and especially never demanding settlements after breakups. But if he wanted to settle things, I had no grounds to argue. After all, everything I had since being with him came from him. All right, Mr. Dean. How would you like to settle it? I took a deep breath, my voice trembling a little at the end. Turning to the suitcases, I instructed the servants to open them all. I love clothes, and everything I packed is just clothing I've worn. Since I was young, I've never given away or tossed out my clothes. So I thought I'd take them with me. Otherwise, they'd probably just end up in the trash. The servants opened each suitcase, revealing clothes, a few plush toys, and some toiletries. As for the bags and jewelry Chris bought, I hadn't taken any of those. Oh, but I did take one thing. I crouched down and retrieved a small box from the bottom of the suitcase. It was from the first month I'd been with Chris. I'd gone with him on a business trip to France, and one evening, he was in a good mood after an event. We passed by a jewelry store, and he bought me a ring. Like many girls, I'd attached a lot of sentimental value to that ring. Originally, I'd planned to secretly take it with me, But now it seemed that wasn't an option. I placed the jewelry box on the coffee table. Mr. Dean, if even these clothes aren't allowed, then I'll leave everything behind. Chris looked at me. Rachel. A headache throbbed. After a sleepless night, he was exhausted, and Rachel's actions only made him feel even more unsettled. Who cared about the money or gifts? He didn't care about the jewelry he'd given her. And if she wanted the stars, he would have made it happen. But she was so adamant about cutting ties. Look at her, wearing her plainest dress today, no jewelry, not even earrings. His chest tightened with frustration. What a fine situation. He'd poured everything into her, only to be left with a thankless heart. He stood speechless, the anger in him so overwhelming that he found himself laughing bitterly. From the beginning, he'd known. The damsel in distress bit. It had all been an act. He was well aware of what the Dean family elders had planned. When he saw the torn condoms last night, he'd been furious. But the reason behind his anger? No one else knew, and no one would have guessed. If he ever had an heir to carry on the family name, he'd only want it to be Rachel's child. But certainly not conceived under these circumstances. Mr. Dean, may I leave now? Chris's silence went on, and I began to feel uneasy. If he was truly going to settle every last detail, he could make me leave the very clothes and shoes I was wearing. I bit my lip, silently hoping he wouldn't be that cold or cruel. Sweetheart, Chris suddenly chuckled softly. He stepped forward and, to my surprise, gently cradled my face in his hands. I felt uneasy, my eyes red and swollen from crying beneath my sunglasses. I didn't want Chris to see how vulnerable I looked. You'd better hope that you thrive once you leave here. Unsure of his meaning, I nodded with as much conviction as I could muster. Mr. Dean, I can stand on my own 2 feet. I'll be fine. Chris said nothing further, his hands dropping to my shoulders for a moment, giving them a slight squeeze before he let go. Go on. Pack Miss Rachel's things and see her out, he instructed, before turning and heading upstairs without a backward glance. I stood there a moment, watching as the servants packed up my things. One of them held out the jewelry box and asked, Miss Rachel, would you like to keep this? I shook my head, managing a small smile. Please give it back to Mr. Dean. Miss Rachel, could you please just take me to the nearest cab stand? Mr. Dean asked us to drive you. Thank you. I didn't refuse. With 6 big suitcases, there was no way I could manage on my own. Chris's driver took me and my things to a small apartment, even helping carry everything upstairs. It wasn't a big place, and the living room was almost full once everything was inside. When the driver left, I slumped onto the sofa, collecting myself, before getting up to put my life back in order. After a shower, my phone buzzed non-stop with incoming messages. I quickly wrapped my hair in a towel, and went to check my phone. It was Dennis calling. This apartment was his. To be precise, he'd let me stay here when my family went bankrupt. And only after I started seeing Chris, did I move into his villa. But Dennis had always kept this place ready for me. We had grown up together, practically inseparable. Our families used to joke about us dating, or even marrying one day. But after my family's financial collapse, the adults in Dennis's family stopped making such jokes. Even so, Dennis had been loyal through it all. When I had nowhere else to go, he was the one who provided me a safe place. Rachel, I just got off the plane. Where are you? Big brother's coming to get you. We'll party all night. I rubbed my still puffy eyes. Sure, I'm at your apartment. Come pick me up, and I'll get ready. You're not at Chris's place? No, we broke up. Fine, he's history. I'll introduce you to someone better tonight. Just make sure you look fabulous. Do I even need to try? Some of us are born stunning. Dennis laughed on the other end. Glad to hear you're in good spirits. See you soon, Rachel. See you, Dennis. After hanging up, I sat for a while, then started getting ready. No matter what, Dennis had just come back, and I needed to welcome him properly. By the time his car arrived, I had composed myself. As I got in, Dennis looked over. Your eyes are a bit swollen. I didn't sleep well last night. Did you cry over the breakup? I couldn't help but pout, just for a little while. Dennis chuckled, reaching over to ruffle my hair. Still the same crybaby as ever. I didn't answer, staring at the road as nostalgia hit me. I'd just turned 22. but it felt as though I'd lived a lifetime. All those carefree years seemed to have been cut short. But no matter how hard, I had to keep going. My dad was gone, but my mom and younger siblings were still abroad. They needed to continue their studies, and life had to move forward. So even if I cried, it could only be for a moment. Your mom and the kids are doing well, they're adjusting. That's a relief. The money you sent paid for a house and school fees. Your mom says it's enough for their daily expenses. So you don't have to worry. Good. I'm glad they're okay. My biggest hope now was that my frail mother and young siblings could live in peace, unaffected by the family's collapse. I wanted them to finish school and grow up safe and healthy. Rachel, what do you plan to do next? First, I'll find a job. I have a degree. I should be able to land something. If you need help, just say the word. Thanks. Danis, I won't be shy about it. Good. Remember, I'm always here for you. I won't let you face this alone. Warmth flooded me. No matter what his family thought, Danis had always stayed the same, loyal and true, just as he'd been since we were kids. Danis introduced me to a group of friends, and we spent the entire night dancing at a club. Exhausted and inebriated, I fell into a carefree slumber. However, upon waking, I found my phone inundated with several unwelcome messages. Rachel, have you heard? That Alice you can't stand. Chris took her to a hotel last night. Look, I've got photos too. I'll send them your way. Still groggy from my hangover, I lay in bed and reluctantly opened the photo. The first thing that caught my eye were Chris's captivating almond-shaped eyes. He was glancing back at the paparazzi, his face as strikingly handsome as ever. But his eyes were utterly cold and distant. Beside him, at the golden revolving door, only a glimpse of a woman was visible. The corner of a vivid red dress and slender, alabaster legs. Even without seeing her face, one could imagine her breathtaking beauty. I stared at the image for a moment, before putting my phone face down on my chest. Messages continued to flood in, and I wanted to ignore them all. Yet when I saw Chris's name, I couldn't resist opening it. It was a video interview, a first for Chris, who had always shunned media attention. Astonishingly, he was addressing last night's scandal. How ironic, I thought. Over the years, he'd been linked with countless women in the press. Chris had never bothered to respond before. But now, just as his sweetheart had returned, and he'd been caught up in another scandal, he was quick to refute it publicly. It was clear how much he cared for this woman. An indescribable ache began to spread from the depths of my heart, gradually permeating my entire being. I felt completely drained, as if even my tear ducts had lost control. I despised myself for this reaction. Hadn't I told myself I only wanted his money? Yet here I was, yearning to be cherished in the same way. There's one more thing I'd like to address, Chris said, his usually playful eyes now filled with rare seriousness and sincerity. The public has always been keenly interested in my private life, and I'm aware of the various false reports circulating in the media. Typically, I don't bother with these baseless rumors, but they've now begun to seriously impact my personal relationships. So, I want to make it clear. I have only one official girlfriend. Any other stories are just that, stories, and shouldn't be given credence. As Chris's gaze fixed firmly on the camera, I found myself unable to meet his eyes, even through the screen. Mr. Dean, a reporter asked, the person you picked up at the airport the other night, was that your only official girlfriend? Suddenly, I couldn't bear to hear his answer. With trembling hands, I hurriedly turned off the video. After the interview, Chris got into his car. Alice, noticing him enter, turned around from the front seat with a sweet smile. Chris, why didn't you clarify things for the media? She asked. Chris looked up at her. Clarify what? That I'm not the only woman you've officially dated. That it's actually Rachel. That pampered princess who's never lifted a finger. Whose first birthday gift from you was an Hermes handbag. Who truly holds your heart. Chris let out a self-deprecating laugh, as if recalling something. There's no need, he said. In his mind he thought, that woman wouldn't care anyway. Someone like her can never be truly won over. She'll always flock to whoever buys her the latest designer bags, or fills her closet with beautiful clothes. She'll gaze at them with sparkling eyes, showering them with sweet nothings until they're dizzy with affection. ready to give her their very hearts. And then, without a backward glance, she'll gather her skirts and walk away, leaving them behind without a second thought. How can you say no need? Alice asked, her smile a mix of mischief and seduction. You've refuted all the previous rumors, so why leave this one unclarified? Could it be that you failed to win her over? And you're deliberately leaving me here to spite her? Chris's expression turned cold. Where's Todd? Hasn't he arrived yet? He wouldn't dare be late. Alice's eyes flashed with anger. If Todd even thinks about being unfaithful, I'll make sure he never sees me again. Chris's amusement deepened. If he's already half-hearted, wouldn't never seeing you again be exactly what he wants? Chris, Alice seethed, you deserve to have your wife run away. Seeing his expression darken, she couldn't resist twisting the knife. With your wife's looks, there are plenty of men willing to shower her with money and attention. For all we know, suitors might already be lining up. And isn't she living at her good friend Dennis's place now? Who knows, he might already have the upper hand. The luxurious Bentley screeched to a halt. Get out, Chris commanded, his face thunderous. Alice was stunned. Chris, we're in the middle of nowhere. You can't just leave me here. Either you get out, or I'll have the driver throw you out. Chris's voice was ice cold. He regretted ever agreeing to help Todd by picking up this woman. If he died young, it would surely be from the stress caused by Rachel and Alice's sharp tongues. Bitter-faced, Alice opened the door. Chris, enjoy being a bachelor forever. She slammed the door and fled before he could respond. Chris returned to his hilltop villa, seething with unexpressed anger. The entire mountaintop glowed with brilliant lights, like a floating palace. But the more dazzling it appeared, the more it highlighted its emptiness and loneliness. In the past, someone would have eagerly rushed out to greet him, as soon as his car stopped. She would have clung to him like a koala, playfully searching his pockets for jewelry, her eyes sparkling with joy. Her delight was infectious, impossible to resist. She loved all things beautiful and luxurious, and he fulfilled her every desire. Even knowing her appearance in his life was calculated, he willingly played along. Perhaps deep down, he was gambling, betting that she had even a fraction of genuine feeling for him, that she wasn't completely indifferent. Until that night, when he discovered the tampered condom, what he had really wanted to ask was, Rachel, have my child, and they'll give you a fortune. But you don't need to do anything. Just stay by my side, and I'll give you everything I have. But it was clear that Rachel had no need for a man's cheap love. She had never even considered believing in it. The reason he had pampered and indulged her so lavishly was simple. He had always liked her. After showering, Chris went to smoke on the balcony. Rachel hated the smell of smoke, so he always made sure to rid himself of any traces before coming home. She loved opulence, transforming his once minimalist villa into a riot of color, even changing the bedding to her preferred soft yellows and greens. Despite smoking several cigarettes, Chris's irritation persisted, the emptiness in his heart growing. Pacing restlessly, he found himself in the dressing room, staring at the untouched jewelry boxes. It was as if Rachel might materialize at any moment, adorning herself with the jewels and smiling at him with those crescent eyes. Her sweet nothings would flow endlessly, never truly touching her heart. He loved her delicate nature, yet despised her heartlessness. Ultimately, Chris chose to compromise. He dialed Rachel's number, unaware of the tenderness creeping into his expression as the call connected. Rachel, he began softly. Mr. Dean? Rachel's in the shower. She can't come to the phone right now. Dennis's voice came clearly through the receiver. The warmth in Chris's eyes vanished without a trace. Chris's voice had turned icy cold, the warmth draining from his eyes. So you're Dennis? Yes. It's me. Rachel is with you? That's right. Dennis smiled as he held the phone, leaning against the wall and gazing at the locked bathroom door. As a fellow man, he could sense the fury and jealousy Chris was desperately trying to suppress. Was this purely possessiveness, or did Chris truly care for Rachel deep down? Dennis was well aware that he was merely a second-generation heir. Lacking any real talent or ability, he'd likely spend his life relying on the family trust fund, forever a parasite. His love life and marriage were never truly under his control. When the Johnson family fell into ruin, He knew any chance with Rachel was lost. But he hadn't been terribly upset. He'd always been a carefree soul. His feelings for Rachel were more akin to a sibling's affection, forged from growing up together. Though he couldn't marry or care for her, he genuinely wished for her happiness. In Dennis's eyes, Rachel was a delicate, fragile rose cultivated in a greenhouse, unable to withstand even the slightest adversity. After the Rachel's family downfall, countless men had set their sights on her. Dennis couldn't help but think that if Chris harbored genuine feelings for Rachel, it could shield her from life's hardships. He lit another cigarette, clearing his throat before continuing, "I'd love to be with her. But unfortunately, she's been in low spirits these past few days, often sneaking off to cry alone. I've tried inviting her to travel with me to lift her mood, but she's refused every time, and it's been troubling me." "She's been crying alone?" Chris's heart instantly softened. "Mr. Dean, if you've already discarded her, why pretend to care now?" Dennis sneered. "When did I say I've discarded her?" Chris retorted. Dennis scoffed. "You're entangled with your first love, so why bother with Rachel anymore? Though I'm a failed second-gen heir, I still have the means to support her. Since she's unhappy in LA, I plan to take her to settle in France." "You won't." Chris's voice was heavy, barely containing his fury. "Mr. Dean, what gives you the right to stop me?" Dennis pressed on aggressively. "Rachel isn't even your ex-girlfriend. In fact, she doesn't even qualify as that, since you only had one official relationship. So what authority do you have over her affairs?" "Dennis, struck a nerve, have I? Hit a sore spot?" Dennis mocked. "Mr. Dean, you may be an elite among elites, a powerful aristocrat. But Rachel is now just a poor girl whose family has fallen from grace. If you're only toying with her, then leave her be. Don't come bothering her anymore." Dennis hung up, immediately blocking Chris's number before he could call back. He needed to deliver a strong dose of medicine to make this high and mighty man willingly come down from his pedestal. That night, Dennis whisked me off to the airport, and we flew to France. After 2 carefree weeks, I received a job offer from a Los Angeles jewelry design studio, with an $18,000 internship salary. In the past, that sum would have barely covered a single earring, but now I was more than satisfied. The feeling of earning my own keep was vastly different from simply receiving unearned money. I promptly booked a flight back to LA, smoothly completing the onboarding process and starting work the next day. The busy work gradually helped me forget my previous anguish. I genuinely enjoyed this job, relishing the sense of fulfillment and self-actualization it brought. In fact, I had hardly thought of Chris at all lately. News about him had become scarce in LA. The endless tabloid rumors about his love life had all but vanished, with even his mysterious first love no longer subject to speculation. Whenever I did recall Chris, I found it increasingly difficult to picture his face. As I grew closer with my colleagues, work became something I eagerly anticipated each day. In my free time, I even began attempting to write fashion columns for magazines, my innate style sense being highly regarded among LA's socialites. In the future, I aspired to open my own boutique. There was a legendary LA socialite who had weathered marriage, divorce, and bankruptcy, yet paid off her debts through her own efforts. Why couldn't I do the same? Although I still cherished wealth, jewelry, and luxury, I had also gained clarity. Looks would inevitably fade, so relying on men was a perilous path. But money earned through my own work would never betray me. My co-worker's sister introduced one of her college friends to me, and despite refusing several times, I ultimately couldn't decline anymore. So I agreed to meet him for lunch at the restaurant downstairs from the office. These days, I no longer adorned myself in luxurious brands. I had even stowed away my designer handbags, carrying only the stylish paper bag from my coffee takeout order. Rachel could live an ordinary life too. Just as I'd said the day I broke up with Chris, I got work, I wouldn't starve. The young man had an impressive resume and worked at a multinational company. His current salary was only $30,000, but they said he was due for a promotion and raise next month, so his future prospects seemed bright. He was clearly quite smitten with me, and I didn't dislike him either. He was a charming, witty gentleman, easily making me burst into laughter. And on my third bout of uncontrollable mirth, Chris suddenly appeared, pulling out the chair next to me and sitting down. The man across from me was understandably surprised, but maintained his politeness. "Excuse me, sir, do we know each other?" Chris didn't look at me, just casually leaning back. "Rachel is delicate and high maintenance, spending money like water. She only drinks Perrier, loves beluga caviar, Alba white truffles, burrata cheese. A single meal can cost tens of thousands. She only carries Hermes Global Limited Editions, only wears haute couture, never the same shoes twice. Are you sure your 30,000 salary can support her?" The man's expression grew increasingly bewildered, though he stubbornly tried to defend. "But Miss Rachel's dress today is just a mass-market brand. And she's not even carrying an Hermes." Chris' smile deepened. "Sir, I haven't finished." I desperately wanted to grab Chris and shove him out. But the moment my fingers touched his sleeve, he simply grasped my hand, locking it on his knee. "Not only is she high maintenance and picky, she also turns on people at the slightest provocation." "Chris." I was so mortified and infuriated I nearly leapt up. But he tightened his hold, even caressing my fingertips suggestively. "Oh yes, and she's very restless in her sleep, often sleepwalking. And when she does, she's as strong as an ox." He paused, glancing at me. "Miss Rachel, do you remember that night we first got together? I had a bruise on my face for 3 days because of you." The man across from me abruptly stood and fled in a panic. I sat there, smoke practically billowing from my ears in fury. But Chris was still in the mood to order new pastries, trying to coax me into eating. I didn't want to deal with him, rising to leave. He hastily paid the bill and hurried after me. I was power walking, the coffee bag in hand. "Rachel," Chris called out behind me. I suddenly stopped, closing my eyes and shouting, "Chris, you old bastard, can you just shut up?" The passers-by on the street all turned to stare. After my outburst, I felt a twinge of regret. Taking a small step back, I lowered my head. "Mr. Dean, I'm very sorry. Even in my fallen state, my upbringing was ingrained in my bones." Amidst the flow of people on the street, Chris looked at the girl before him, wearing a $200 dress, carrying a coffee bag, with only a $5 hair clip. This was the Rachel who once refused to wear anything but haute couture or carry Hermes. From birth to 22, she had been cocooned in luxury, unaware of life's hardships. But now, she was just like any ordinary person, rushing around for her daily necessities. No longer as glamorous and haughty. She only elicited more tenderness in his heart. "Rachel," Chris said, a slight catch in his throat as he stepped forward and tightly embraced the woman he loved. People only reveal their unguarded, uninhibited side when they are lavishly pampered. But when Chris suddenly yanked off his tie and forcefully pinned me down on the back seat, kissing me roughly, I couldn't help but curse him. An old man with no self-control. He was a bit helpless, frustrated by my anger, yet shook his head and chuckled. The scorching kisses trailed down my neck, leaving a tingling sensation. "Rachel, you've never complained about me being old when we're in bed." That's right. Who was the one begging for mercy in the end? I was intoxicated by the kiss, sinking into desire, yet still held back by that last thread of rationality. "Chris, I haven't asked you yet." As if he knew what I was about to ask. He grasped my wrist and pulled me into his embrace. "I'll take you to meet someone." "Who?" "My legendary first love. I met Alice, and her husband Todd as well." "So you're Rachel? Wow. You're 10 times more gorgeous than in the photos." Alice gushed, grabbing my hands. "And we both have dimples, but yours are so much cuter. Rachel, how did you get to be so beautiful?" She praised me endlessly, then whispered conspiratorially, "Chris is one lucky dog to have snagged you." I couldn't help but chuckle, though I didn't dare laugh out loud. Chris couldn't sit still, pulling me to his side. "She just babbles on and on all day, don't listen to her. Now can you please explain what's really going on?" Chris held my hand. "The situation is exactly as you saw. Alice isn't my first love, we just grew up together. She's always liked Todd. But those rumors," I began. Chris smiled wryly. "When you were 20, I visited your home, and your mother mentioned that you and Dennis had been destined for marriage since childhood. I thought, since I couldn't marry the woman I loved, I might as well never consider marriage again." He continued. "At the time, Alice and Todd were fighting, So we made a deal to use each other, she to get Todd back, and I to avoid the Dean family pressuring me to marry. I listened in a daze, seizing on one point. So Chris, you've liked me for a very long time? Chris' smile held a self-deprecating edge. Do you remember your 16th birthday, when you got that crown, the pearl tears? Of course. That was my favorite since I was little. But Dad said it was too expensive. My eyes widened. So you were the one who bought it for me? Chris nodded. But you were still too young then. I was afraid it would scare you. He let out a soft laugh. After that, you wore that crown every year on your birthday. On your 20th, when Dennis celebrated with you, you were beaming by his side. I instinctively explained. Dennis has always just been like an older brother to me. And he feels the same. Chris shook his head. No, Rachel, Dennis likes you. He's just too rational, knowing he's not right for you, that he can't truly protect you. He continued, after your family's troubles, the Dennis family stopped mentioning your marriage. I wanted to marry you, but the Dean elders would never allow it. So I spread the rumor that I'd never consider marriage, hoping to avoid their pressure. So you knew all along that I was deliberately getting close to you? I asked. I did. Then why didn't you expose it? Because it was the first chance I'd ever had to be this close to you. I frowned. But why were you so angry when I tampered with the condom? If you liked me, then having my child should have made you happy. Not scheming for the Dean family's money. Chris gently caressed my face. You don't have to give me a child. You don't have to do anything. Just stay by my side and be happy. I'll gladly give you everything I have. Tears spilled down my cheeks, my whole body trembling. Is this real? Am I dreaming? You like me? You've liked me for so long? I cried. If you'd told me the crown was from you on my 16th birthday, I would have been overjoyed. Rachel. Chris was both surprised and delighted. Then you truly saw Dennis as a brother. And I've been the one you've liked all along? I threw myself into his embrace. Chris, how do I prove this isn't a dream? His voice held a nervous edge. Let's get married. Right now. Now. Yes, right now. He pulled me up. Wait, what? Alice exclaimed as we started to leave. We're getting married, Chris replied, his peach blossom eyes sparkling with joy. This was the dream of his lifetime, and now it was firmly in his grasp. In the countless wonderful nights to come, she would be by his side like the moonlight on his pillow, accompanying him until the end. The end of story.